Today, we're going to connect some dots for you. Some pretty fascinating ones, actually.
Yeah, we're looking at the thinking that's shaping, well, a lot of conservative action in America right now.
Exactly. We're exploring the links or potential links between the kind of critiques you often hear from someone like Chris Hedges
And the strategic thinking in the old Louis Powell memo.
and then bringing it right up to date with Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership, which is, well, it's incredibly detailed.
It really is. Policy, personnel, the works. So the goal here is to understand the philosophies, the strategies underneath it all.
And what that might tell you, our listener, about where conservative politics could be heading.
It's an interesting mix. Hedges with his deep critiques of power.
Then Powell's memo, that historical call for, let's say, a more assertive conservative movement.
And now Project 2025. Which, it really does feel like taking that kind of blueprint and saying, okay, here's exactly how we'd govern. Let's see how these threads might weave together.
Okay, so let's start with the mandate itself, Project 2025. Right away, it signals things are different now, not like the Reagan years.
Yeah, it literally says it's not 1980. In 2023, the game has changed. That's a direct quote.
And then it brings up this idea, the long march of cultural Marxism through our institutions has come to pass. What exactly are they getting at with cultural Marxism here?
Well, that phrase, it's fundamental to their whole argument. They're basically saying that a specific set of, let's call them far-left cultural ideas have slowly taken over.
Taken over key institutions.
Right. Education, media, government itself. And they see this as deeply damaging to their vision of America.
So it's not just about policy disagreements.
No, not at all. It's framed as a fundamental ideological battle, a struggle for the soul of the country, you might say.
And you really feel this sense of something needing to be restored. They talk about an urgent need to reverse this tide and restore our republic to its original moorings.
Yes, and referencing the Declaration and the Constitution as the guides for that restoration.
This idea of going back to first principles, to their specific understanding of American ideals, it comes up again and again.
It does. They consistently point to those founding documents. Their interpretation is that those principles are the right path, and that modern ideas,
especially things they label wokeism.
Exactly. Which seems to cover a lot of ground, social justice, identity politics. They see these as deviations, as straying from the true path.
And the mandate seems to suggest that, left alone, Americans actually prefer those original principles.
Yeah, the idea is that ordinary Americans inherently get it, but these newer ideologies are being pushed on them.
Okay, let's bring in Chris Hedges for a moment. He also talks a lot about decline, about a kind of decay in American society.
He certainly does.
The mandate points to cultural Marxism. How might Hedges see the root cause? Is there any overlap at all in just sensing that things have gone wrong?
That's a really interesting comparison. Hedges definitely critiques modern America. He focuses on, the damage done by corporate power, the erosion of democracy, kind of spiritual emptiness.
So different causes.
Very different causes. He'd likely point to economic inequality, the influence of big money, maybe the failures of capitalism itself, not cultural Marxism.
But maybe they both agree something fundamental has shifted from some earlier, maybe more stable time.
You could argue there's a shared sense of loss, perhaps?
Yeah.
A feeling that things aren't what they used to be or what they should be, but the diagnosis and the prescription, worlds apart.
The mandate also hits this theme of a disconnect between the people and an elite. It says, to the left, these assertions of patriotic self-assurance are just so many signs of our moral depravity, proof that we need a ruling elite making decisions for us.
Right. That narrative is powerful. It paints a picture of an out-of-touch elite, mostly on the left, who think they know best and are actively working against everyday Americans' values.
And that helps justify the changes they want to make.
Absolutely. It's a key part of mobilizing support.
Okay, let's think about the Powell memo now, from the early 70s. That was that call for the business world to get organized, to push back, shape policy more actively.
A hugely influential document in conservative circles.
Now, the mandate doesn't explicitly say we're following Powell's playbook, but when you see this intense focus on coordinated, long-term action, targeting institutions, it feels connected, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You can definitely see the echoes. Powell called for conservatives to really engage in the marketplace of ideas, in media, universities, the courts.
And Project 2025.
It feels like that same spirit, but maybe supercharged. and focus squarely on taking the reins of the executive branch to implement this incredibly broad conservative agenda. It's very action-oriented.
And they say as much, right? They talk about the collective action of our movement, that reversing this tide is too great for any one conservative policy shop to spearhead.
Exactly. They're calling for numerous groups to work together, and the mandate itself is that collective action in a way.
How so?
Well, just look at the sheer size and detail. Policy plans, personnel ideas for nearly every single federal agency. It's not just abstract principles.
It's a detailed game plan.
A very detailed game plan. That level of strategic planning, that coordination across the movement, it absolutely resonates with the kind of proactive approach Powell advocated for decades ago.
So let's dive into some of those specific strategies. One that jumps out is personnel is policy. That seems absolutely central to Project 2025. What does that really mean on the ground?
It means they believe the single most important thing is getting people who are completely aligned with the president's goals into key government jobs, top to bottom.
So laws and regulations aren't enough.
Not in their view. You need the right people interpreting those laws, enforcing those regulations, driving the agenda day to day. It's about implementation.
And they seem to anticipate pushback. They talk about needing to overcome obstructionist human resources departments.
Yeah, that suggests they expect resistance from the career civil service, the permanent government workers.
And the goal is to give the political appointees, the ones the president brings in, more power to push through the agenda, regardless of that resistance.
That seems to be the idea. It highlights this inherent tension, right, between the elected political leadership and the nonpartisan career staff.
The mandate's perspective seems to be that the current bureaucracy might be, well, ideologically opposed or at least not helpful.
And they explicitly mention the early Trump administration having too few political appointees as a mistake they don't want to repeat. That really underscores how vital they think this personnel strategy is.
And they're not vague about it. The mandate names people already working on this transition planning. Paul Dans, Denzis Dean Kirk.
Advisors, too. It shows a high level of organization. They're not waiting. They're actively identifying and vetting people now.
They even sketch out a White House structure. Deputy chiefs for operations and policy, managing the executive branch, connecting with outside conservative groups. It sounds very deliberate.
It does. It sounds like a design for maximum control and efficiency in pushing the president's agenda and keeping the broader movement locked in. Very centralized.
Okay, moving beyond just people, there's this phrase, bureaucratic reform and deconstruction of the administrative state. That sounds significant.
It's strong language, isn't it? Deconstruction of the administrative state. That generally means shrinking the federal government significantly, reducing the power of agencies and unelected officials.
How would they do that, according to the mandate?
Well, they talk about making it easier to fire federal workers, getting rid of entire bureaus they see as wasteful, or pushing the wrong ideology.
And curbing what they call woke propaganda within the government itself.
Right. It's a multi-pronged approach aimed at reshaping the bureaucracy itself.
They're also critical of the current civil service system generally, saying it's inefficient, maybe pays too much compared to the private sector. They even mention the old PACE exam.
Yeah, the critique is that the civil service has become too protected, too insulated from political control, and they want to make it more responsive to the elected president.
The PACE exam reference is interesting. They seem to view getting rid of that standardized test as a step away from meritocracy.
That seems to be the implication, yes, that the hiring process needs reform to ensure competence and perhaps alignment.
And the proposed reforms to the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, giving the president more direct control. What would that actually do?
Well, making the OPM director a cabinet-level position, increasing presidential oversight, it would significantly shift power.
Away from the idea of an independent civil service.
Potentially, yes. It would give a president much more direct say over hiring, firing, managing the entire federal workforce.
They also talk about bringing back Trump-era executive orders about federal employee unions and even question if public sector unions are constitutional.
That's a pretty direct challenge to organize labor within government. It reflects a view that these unions interfere with efficient government or the president's mandate.
And lastly on this, moving security clearance investigations back to OPM. Why is that significant? Didn't they go to defense after some big breaches?
They did. But the mandate argues that was an overreach. They want a reformed OPM under closer presidential control to handle most of those clearances. It fits that theme of centralizing personnel functions.
Okay, the mandate then goes agency by agency. It's incredibly detailed. We obviously can't cover every single proposal, but maybe highlight a few key areas just to illustrate how these big ideas play out.
Sure. Let's take national defense. The focus is crystal clear. China is the top threat, period.
And internally.
They want to end what they call social experimentation, which seems to mean diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, and refocus entirely on warfighting. Modernize the nuclear arsenal, too.
What about immigration?
Strict enforcement is the theme. Ending certain case closure practices, mandatory e-verify for employers, maybe even designating the immigration agency, USCIS, as intelligence community adjacent. Much tougher enforcement across the board.
And the State Department, foreign policy.
They emphasize needing a clear America First vision, and crucially, appointing personnel who are fully committed to that vision, using the confirmation process to ensure alignment.
So across these different areas, defense, immigration, foreign policy, you see those themes again.
Absolutely. A very specific definition of national interest, pushing back against what they see as ideological drift, and making sure the government machinery is totally aligned with the president's agenda. Personnel is policy.
Okay, let's bring Chris Hedges back in. His work often warns about, democratic norms eroding, the danger of too much corporate power, maybe authoritarian tendencies creeping in.
Yes, those are constant themes for him.
So looking at Project 2025, the strategies, the proposed reforms, would Hedges see things to be concerned about from his perspective?
Oh, almost certainly. Given his focus on concentrated power and potential abuses, he'd likely be very skeptical.
For instance?
Well, the push for much greater presidential control over the entire bureaucracy, the emphasis on ideological loyalty for government jobs. Hedges might see that as potentially weakening checks and balances, moving towards a more centralized, less accountable executive. That aligns directly with his warnings.
And what about the economy? Hedges is a huge critic of corporate power. How might he view the mandate's economic and regulatory ideas?
That's another likely point of friction. While the mandate does express some concerns about specific corporations, especially big tech, or those seen as woke.
Hedges' critique is much broader, right?
Much broader. He'd probably argue that many mandate proposals like deregulation tax cuts would actually increase corporate power and worsen the economic inequality he sees as a root problem.
So he might see the focus on cultural Marxism as a distraction.
Possibly. A distraction from what he views as the more fundamental economic issues driving societal problems. Their analyses are just fundamentally different.
Okay, so as we start to pull these threads together, what are the big overarching themes you see coming out of the Project 2025 mandate?
Well, definitely a desire to restore a specific vision of traditional American identity and values. A major emphasis on shrinking the federal government's power and reach the deconstruction idea.
Also, a strong focus on national security and economic competition, particularly with China.
Yes, and underpinning it all is this deep skepticism, even hostility, towards progressive ideologies, towards wokeism.
And what about the challenges? Trying to actually do all this.
Huge challenges. You're talking about massive changes to a vast, complex federal bureaucracy. There would be immense resistance, legally, politically, from within the government, from parts of society.
And the proposals themselves are so ideologically charged.
Exactly, which almost guarantees significant political conflict. It wouldn't be a smooth process.
Plus, there's always that gap, isn't there, between wanting decisive day one action
and the messy reality of governing. Laws, courts, diverse opinions, established procedures, they all slow things down.
Right. It's one thing to write a detailed plan.
It's another thing entirely to make it happen in the real world.
So we've taken this deep dive into Project 2025's mandate for leadership, its principles, its strategies, its specific plans. We've tried to connect it back to the historical context of the Powell memo and contrast it with the critical perspectives of someone like Chris Hedges.
And it's clear. This mandate, it represents a really significant, highly detailed roadmap for one possible future direction for the country under a conservative administration.
And as always, it's really up to you, the listener, to weigh these ideas, to think critically about what they mean, what their impact might be.
And to keep exploring different perspectives to build your own informed understanding.
So let me leave you with a final question to mull over. Given just how ambitious and detailed this Project 2025 mandate is, what do you think are the most critical choices, or maybe the potential turning points, that American society might face as these ideas get debated and possibly put into practice in the years ahead? It's definitely a conversation that's just getting started. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.